Hi, and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today, we're going to talk about Marie Antoinette. Usually, it's just me, but today I have my friend Kevin. Hi, Kevin.
Hello. It's a pleasure to be back.
Happy to have you.
Thank you.
You ready to learn about Marie Antoinette?
Absolutely.
Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna was born on November 2nd, 1755, one day after the Lisbon earthquake, tsunami, and firestorm. And for that story, you can check out Maria I of Portugal's episode. She was born the very next day after that tsunami. She was the 15th of 16 total children, though 3 of her older siblings had died before she was born. Her surviving siblings were 17-year-old Maria Anna, 14-year-old Joseph, 13-year-old Maria Christina, 12-year-old Maria Elizabeth, 10-year-old Charles, 9-year-old Maria Amalia, 8-year-old Leopold, and 5-year-old Maria Johanna, 4-year-old Maria Josepha, 3-year-old Maria Carolina, and 1-year-old Ferdinand. And she was followed by her only younger sibling, Maximilian. So if you didn't catch the pattern, all of her sisters are named Maria something. Around the time Maria Antonia turned 5, her oldest brother was getting married. He was the heir, and he needed heirs of his own. So Marie's 19-year-old brother Joseph was marrying 19-year-old Isabella of Parma, an Italian. When Maria Antonia was 7 years old, she met a child prodigy, the perks of being a princess. He was just a couple of months younger than Marie, and he was already an accomplished pianist. His name was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. 7-year-old Maria Antonia had a play date with 7-year-old Mozart. How cute is that? The same year that little Marie met little Mozart, she also became an aunt at the ripe old age of 7. Her brother Joseph had a little girl named Maria Theresa, because that's the pattern. They're all named Maria. Even later that year, Marie's older sister, Maria Johanna, caught smallpox and died on the 23rd of December, 2 days before Christmas. The following year, when Marie was 8, her brother's wife Isabella was expecting again after 2 miscarriages in as many years. Isabella also came down with smallpox and went into labor 3 months early. Her baby died, and Isabella followed just 5 days later, having never recovered from labor and delivery. The year 1765 was busy. 2 weddings and a funeral. In January, Marie's oldest brother Joseph was getting remarried after Isabella's death to smallpox. He needed an heir, and he had just the one daughter. He didn't really want to get married again. He missed his wife, but he caved to pressure, and he married Maria Josepha. The couple was never happily married, with Joseph going out of his way to avoid his wife. And you guessed it, they were related, because she's a Maria too. The Maria name is a dead giveaway. She was his second cousin. The Austrians loved marrying their cousins. That was their thing. Then in the summertime, Marie's next oldest surviving brother, Leopold, was also getting married. In August, 18-year-old Leopold married 20-year-old Maria Louisa. So another Maria name, another cousin. Just after the wedding celebrations, Maria's father died suddenly in his carriage. So I don't know what it was that killed him. I imagine like a heart attack or something. Just like he was in his carriage and then he suddenly died. Stroke, heart attack, I don't know. It was fast, though. The king is dead, long live the king. The new Holy Roman Emperor was Marie's oldest brother, 23-year-old Joseph. 3 months after the death of her father, Marie turned 8 years old, so she's still little. All this stuff is happening. She's just little. The death of her father and the accession of her brother didn't slow down the affairs of this gigantic family. The new emperor was marrying his 24-year-old sister, Maria Christina, to 28-year-old Duke Albert. The next year, when Maria Antonia was 11, her sister Maria Josepha was sick with smallpox. She was engaged to be married. She held Marie and told her she wasn't going to be married. She was going to the family crypt instead, because she was dying. The next year, when Maria was 12, another one of her sisters was getting married. Maria's 16-year-old sister was getting married to the 17-year-old king of Sicily. When Maria was 13, her 23-year-old sister married the 28-year-old Duke of Parma, Another Italian.
It seems like so many children, it's such a big family.
It's gigantic. Her mother had 16 children.
That's a lot of children.
Yeah, and she was second
That's
to
a
the
lot of
youngest.
weddings.
When Maria was 14, she received some bad news. Her oldest niece had died at the age of just 7. She had developed a lung infection and suffered an extremely high fever, and there were no antibiotics. Just 2 weeks after the death of her 7-year-old niece, Maria's hand was asked for. She was only 14. The youngest any of her sisters had been married was 16, but her brother agreed. Maria Antonia was getting married to the grandson of the King of France. His father had died young, so he was his grandfather's heir. He was next up after his grandpa. Maria Antonia was going to be the Queen of France. Her hand was requested in February, and by April she was married by proxy. That means married legally in paperwork, but they never met. And they weren't religiously married under the eyes of God, but they did have a ceremony. Her older brother stood in for the groom in the ceremony. So she married her brother, but really she was marrying the King of France. He just wasn't there. Or not the king, the Dauphin of France. He just wasn't there. How awkward if you go to your wedding and it's your brother.
Right? That, it just seems weird, but I guess you got to fill in
Someone had to stand there.
royalty.
Maria Antonia was sent with an entourage to France. And they stopped on the Austrian-French border where a tent was set up. A really, really nice tent. It was beyond glamping. This was a velvet tent in the middle of the woods right on the border.
It's royalty.
Maria Antonia was required to say goodbye to her entire entourage, all of her friends, all of her helpers, even her dog, a pug named Mops. Nothing Austrian could come with her to France. She entered the tent on the Austrian side, changed her clothing entirely into French fashion, and exited the tent on the French side as Dauphine Marie Antoinette. So she's no longer Maria Antonia. She's Marie Antoinette now because she's French.
French. And now the queen.
Well, the future queen. Her husband is the heir to the throne of France.
Okay.
She is the Dauphine, which means the next queen. Then she went to meet her husband and his grandfather, the King of France. 14-year-old Marie Antoinette met her husband, 15-year-old Prince Louis. They were second cousins once removed because why not? That's what the Austrians did. They were married in person just 2 days after meeting. Now it was official in the eyes of God. They were married. The young couple were complete strangers and very young. They were unable to consummate their marriage. It seems like Louis was swayed by public opinion that the Austrians were the bad guys, and he was worried that his Austrian teenage wife would try to manipulate him with affection. Like if he, if they got together in bed, then who knows what this Austrian spy lady could do to him. This is why you don't put all of your peace plans on the marriage of two teenagers that have never even met. Mistakes were made. There were no children for years because they weren't having sex at all. The marriage was never consummated. The royal couple was examined by doctors, and it was determined that possibly the Dauphin's foreskin didn't retract properly, and it may have been painful for him to have sex. The French court didn't really care for Marie Antoinette. She was Austrian, and in their opinion, probably a spy. 4 years into their marriage, the King of France died. The grandpa? He died. The king is dead. Long live the king. The new king was Marie's husband, 19-year-old King Louis XVI. His queen consort was 18-year-old Queen Marie Antoinette. The new teenage king prayed to God to help them as he felt they were too young to rule. He was basically like, oh God, help us please. Like, I do not know how to do this job. I'm a teenager. They had been living at Versailles, and Versailles wasn't just a palace. It was the most extravagant palace ever seen. It was fancy. There were protocols on protocols on protocols. There were rules about everything. Who could do what based on rank? Marie Antoinette was not even allowed to dress herself. She had to let whoever the highest ranking woman in the room was dress her.
So they had rules for everything.
Everything. And Austrian court wasn't like that. Austrian court was fancy. She was a princess there, but it was not as formal as French court. It was not as extravagant. There's no Versailles in Austria. She tried to follow all the rules, but there were a lot of rules, and she's just a teenager. And this was next level compared to how she grew up. The clothing, the food, the surroundings, gold and diamonds everywhere. Everything was covered in gold and diamonds. Word had been spread that the royal couple's marriage had been consummated, but it still hadn't. They still hadn't had sex, and they'd been married 4 years at this point. The teenage king and queen of France had not had any sex at all. Marie Antoinette's mother was writing her letters, telling her that she needed a baby to make her marriage official. Like, they can still send you home. They can send you home until you make an heir. Her mother kept saying things like, men aren't that complicated. Be sweet and kind and patient, and that's all you have to do. And then you'll have babies. And Marie Antoinette was charismatic and bubbly. She was likable. But Louis was not interested in having sex with his young wife. She could not tempt him. And then the price of grain went up. When people can't afford grain, they can't afford bread. And when people can't afford bread, they're usually not pleased with the rulers of their government. Cue the flour war. There were riots. Over the course of 17 days, 123 distinct riots broke out in the Paris basin. Famine had arrived, and the peasants were fighting back. It took nearly 5 months to get the riots under control, with most of the uprisings taking place during the first 17 days. During this time, Marie was encouraging her husband to assist the revolutionaries in the American Revolution. She was all, hey, have you heard? The Americans are griefing the British, and we should get in on that because we hate the British too. So the people of France were starving, and the French government was sending aid to the Americans to help them out in their war. And the people didn't really appreciate that. So I think we should say thank you to the French for helping us, even though they were starving to death at the time.
Thank you to the French.
At some point, Marie Antoinette's brother, the Holy Roman Emperor, visited the young couple. There was a walk and some conversation between Marie Antoinette's brother and her husband. No one knows exactly what was said, but it was a birds and the bees conversation. He was like, hey, I don't know if you know how babies are made, but things have to happen. It has been suggested that there were animals involved as a sort of visual aid. He was like, see these animals, see what they do. This is what you have to do. And possibly locks and key metaphors. The king was extraordinarily interested in locks and keys. And there was possibly some kind of metaphor about a key going inside a lock. Can't unlock the lock without the key.
The key. Right.
And it worked. A year later, the royal couple got down to the business of heirs. That she was pregnant not long after that. I'm not going to get into why it's so specific, but in August of 1777, 22-year-old Queen Marie Antoinette and 23-year-old King Louis consummated their 8-year marriage. So they had sex 8 years in. And that solved their problem. Queen Marie Antoinette was pregnant within 6 months. In December of 1778, the king and the queen had their first baby. Princess Marie Therese was born. But she was a girl. And one girl after 8 years wasn't a track record that the French people appreciated. You know the drill. Part 2 is on Patreon, and the link for Patreon is in the show description. See you there.
Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.